in the short run. And one of the things we talk about very regularly, if the longer you invest, the greater probability that not only will you make a positive return, but the more and more likely that a return will approach about 10%. Now, this article also used real returns. And in case you weren't aware, real returns are actual returns minus inflation. He talked about the real returns being over long periods of time being 3.8%. I don't know where he got that number from. All the data that I've looked at shows about 6.8 or 6.9 as a real return, which means actual returns of about 10% minus inflation of about 3%. 10 minus 3 works out to about 7, not 3.8. So he's a whole 4 points below. Now, if you talk about maybe what the average investor makes when they trade stocks, that probably is a pretty reasonable number because the data continually shows individual investors that buy and sell either mutual funds or stocks tend to underperform the market by about 4% a year. I'll go back to my article here. And the person he referenced, again, this Professor Bodie, he, in his other article that was referenced, said things like this, quote, "One thing we know is the stock market has not become any safer now." Okay, great. No one thought it became safer. Again, keeping in mind this is 2009. He then goes on to say, "My attitude is I lost 40% and I'm going to walk away." I have talked to people that have done that. The results have not been pretty. Professor Bodie goes on to say, "You could lose what little bit you have left." Well, of course, you always could. People ever ask me if I could lose all my money in the stock market as a whole. I guess we could create a scenario. It just hasn't happened in the last 200 years in the United States. Other countries, sure. Could it happen again in the United, or happen not again, but ever happen in the United States? Sure. Anything is theoretically possible. What is very interesting is I took from the date of that article in March of 2009 that Professor Bodie wrote, and the total U.S. stock market as measured by Vanguard's total stock market index is up 205%. 205%. So if you had 100,000, you wouldn't have now 200,000 because that would be a 100% increase. You would have $305,000. So after he was talking about how awful the market is and how much you're going to lose money because the market fell 40%, of course we know this in hindsight, that was the ideal time to invest. When the markets drop, historically, because that's all I know, I don't know the future, historically after big drops, the markets not only tend to recover, but tend to recover at a slightly faster rate than the historical average. So, again, back to the story, he finishes by saying, quote, "This makes the typical pyramid scheme of the original stock market look honest by comparison." What does he mean, the original stock market? What does he mean, pyramid scheme? He goes on this little rant about how you can only make money in stocks if you buy in first and find a sucker to buy it from you later. While that's true in some cases with some stocks, the stock market as a whole is a reflection of corporations and well-intentioned and hardworking people creating value with the money that you are able to give them by buying shares. So the whole bias of this story is mind-numbingly, staggeringly bad. Now, to circle around a little bit more on my thoughts on actual 401ks, and one thing that was not covered in this story, money you put in a 401k is tax deductible. So if you put in $10,000 and you're in a 28% tax bracket, you save $2,800 in taxes. So the money out of your pocket is only $7,200 versus being paid that money. Did not take that into account. A lot of employers give a free match, whether it's 50% of what you put in or 25% of what you put in. I stand by my long-term position. You must absolutely collect all of that free money, even if you are in a subpar 401k. A couple of reasons: most people change jobs, so in a few years you can take that money and do something smarter with it. But if they're going to match your money, even if it's only 25 or 50%, that can cover a whole lot of shitty performance and higher expense ratios. Not to mention, you will now be able to lock that money up and avoid taxes, at least until you take it out. Currently, you can put $18,000 a year into your 401k. If you are over the age of 50, that number jumps up by $6,000 to $24,000. Most people are not able to max those numbers out. If you are, well, then we have to talk about some other options, which might include IRAs or Roth IRAs. But I'm guessing if you're saving $24,000 a year, you probably have a pretty generous income, and you may not qualify for IRAs or Roth IRAs. And then that's a whole other category. But there's plenty of room to save money there. My default advice, until I know more about your specific situation, is that you must put in enough to your 401k to get the free money. You must collect all of that free money. If that means you have to cut some corners or not eat out, you must do that. You cannot pass up on free money. After that, if you can still save more money, you go to an IRA or a Roth IRA where you can have control and get index funds for sure on your own. You can keep your expenses low, and you can adjust the account the way that you want to. And there's endless philosophies on how one should do this, and from time to time I discuss those on this show. If you can max out yours, and if you have a spouse, their IRA or Roth IRA, and you can still save money, one or the other of you, or just you if you're single, can then think about going back into the 401k and adding more money. One of the problems with 401ks is the funds typically have a slightly higher expense ratios, and the performance in the long run is not as good. That is one of the reasons I recommend to people all of the time, you must move the money out of your old 401k. Your current employer probably will not allow you to move money out, although there are exceptions. You can check with your employer. If you've been there a long time, you might be better off to move some of it out. But anything short of that, you can't move money out of a current 401k. But I run into people all of the time that have 2, 3, 4 old 401ks, and sometimes those companies don't even exist anymore, which can make it a little more difficult for you to get your own money. But the 401ks typically have higher expenses, so you want to move that money. You want to do a rollover into an IRA, and then you can have control. You can get the low-cost index funds that I talk about. You can keep your expenses low. If you're not 100% sure how to do that, contact me. I'll be happy to help. And you can get a hold of me, Phil, at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com. And in your email, of course, if you contact me, please do include your telephone number, because one of the things I'm going to have to do is call you to set up an appointment, maybe in a few days, but probably most likely a week or so out, where we can talk about it. If I can just help you get that done, great. If you want more help, again, we can talk about that. So think about that old 401k and getting rid of it and rolling it into an IRA. And I think we're going to end the Investing Skeptically segment there. So hopefully I can see you in a few weeks in Southern California, either Los Angeles or San Francisco areas. And I will try to give you more specific details in the next show, exactly when and where I will be. And we're going to take, of course, a little commercial break, and then we'll talk with Dan Barker.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show on Secular Media Network.
Here's an excerpt from Non-Believer Nation by David Noyce.
Much has changed in America, for better and worse, in the century since the 1912 election. As Americans went to the polls that year, few would have imagined that in the decades ahead the country would split the atom, send men to the moon, and become the globally dominant military and economic power. Few would have predicted the progress, even if imperfect, that America has made toward racial equality, women's rights, and gay rights. Unfortunately, however, not all the change has been positive. Despite its achievements, America now sits in the early years of the 21st century as a highly dysfunctional and seriously troubled society. And many of its problems, from the immature level of its internal dialogue to the misguided direction of its public policy, can be traced directly or indirectly to the impact of the religious right, and, perhaps even more importantly, to the marginalization of the secular demographic. As such, the rise of secular Americans is not happening a moment too soon. If America does not learn to recognize and respect non-believers and religious skeptics as a valued segment of the population, bleak times will surely await the country and the rest of the world. Over 3 decades ago, when the religious conservatives became a major political force, the country embarked on a terrible, long descent, one that continues today and will not be reversed without a renewed appreciation of reason, critical thinking, and the forward-looking values promoted by secular Americans. This is not to suggest that religion itself must be made irrelevant, but only that effective opposition is needed to the politically mobilized fundamentalist element. That effective opposition, lacking for decades, is now taking root in a transformative movement fueled by Americans who will no longer allow personal secularity to be stigmatized. Given the state of affairs after several decades of religious right dominance, we should all be hoping that secular Americans win their place at the table.
Non-Believer Nation by David Noyce is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are, of course, listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Just so the listeners know, you may hear occasional thunder in the background. We're in the middle of a storm, but despite that, I soldier on because my guest today is so important. We couldn't possibly delay any further. I have with me one of the co-presidents of the FFRF, Dan Barker. How are you, sir?
Hi, Phil. How are you? Famous Phil. I'm doing great.
You're not the first one to say that. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, you're pretty almost a household name now these days. So.
Well, it's one of those things that if you go to conferences and you're on boards for 10 years, and last year I went to 14 different conferences, I do get to know a few people.
Yeah, well, you do. So if you want, I used to be a preacher, and if you want me to stop the thunder, I could pray and change the weather for you.
Well, I just finished my rain dance, so that would spoil my efforts.
Oh, it would, so we can't conflict, yeah.
Yeah, because that could cause really bad magic.
Yeah, but you have to do it the right way. Counterclockwise is different from clockwise when you do your dance, and if you do it the wrong way, you just make it worse.
Well, of course, everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. Well, Dan, I know you are involved with the FFRF, and I'm sure you've talked about the story a million times about how you met Annie Laurie on the Oprah show, so I won't bore my listeners unless they complain and bitch to me, which, by the way, you can swear on my show, although it's probably not your nature, but you're free to do so. But tell me, what is the FFRF doing today? What's moving and shaking over there?
Yeah, well, we're growing, like all the groups are growing. We're really growing fast. We're almost 24,000 members now. Our building expanded, and you know about that.
I do indeed.
Huge expansion last year. We quadrupled our space. We now have room for offices for our 7 full-time attorneys. 5 of them are permanent, and there's 2 on these year-long fellowships. And they are really, really busy. We have a legal assistant and legal interns. And they can't get the work done. People all over the country are complaining about violations of state-church separation in the city hall or in the state or the principal of the high school or you name it. There's just all these different issues. And we're writing hundreds and hundreds of letters. Last year we had more than almost 4,000 complaints come in. And we've got some great victories just from a letter. Maddie Ziegler just had a victory about high school that was holding a graduation in a church near Las Vegas. And just a letter from us sent to the school. They said, well, I guess we shouldn't be doing this. So they stopped it. So it's nice when you can win these cases without going to court. But we also go to court. We usually have 12 to 14 cases in the courts at any one time. We just had a bunch of victories. So I think we're down to 8 or 10 now. We're going to be adding a few more. prayer at city council meetings, 10 Commandments monuments in public high school property, the federal IRS lawsuits, and a high school in India